Greetings, my name is BJ Wagner, and I'm the Director of Training and Development here at IFPS. The purpose of this video is to give you an overview of Job Performance Station Number 3, Measurements, outlining the purpose and the tools used during the station. This station includes 5 hose assemblies, which will be measured for overall length, cut length, and crimp diameter. Included at the station are several hose terminal end dimension laminates, as well as several tools that will be used during the measurement process. We will take a look at those as part of the Job Performance Station overview. The tools available at this station include a dial caliper used to measure the crimp diameter of the hose assembly, a 12-inch scale or square for measuring the hose assembly length, a protractor or angle finder for measuring the terminal end offset angle, a calculator for calculating the amount to be removed from the overall length to determine the hose cut length based on the terminal ends that are present within the hose assembly, a thread identification kit to aid in measuring the terminal ends for proper identification and sizing, a flashlight, and a magnifying glass, both for inspection of the hose assembly. And finally, available laminates at the station, which we will review shortly. The purpose of this station is to demonstrate one's ability to accurately measure the overall hose assembly length, remembering that the measurement points vary based upon the terminal end style and the fitting type. The station will also demonstrate one's ability to accurately measure the final crimp diameter to ensure that the hose is assembled correctly, keeping in mind to measure across the flats, at a midpoint of the crimp, and between the ridges formed by the crimping process. And finally, this station will demonstrate one's ability to measure the terminal and offset angle using a far reference point. Regarding the laminates, here is a view of each laminate available, which can be reviewed from our website. The first laminate covers various terminal ends, including flange fittings and various 45-degree angle ends, such as O-ring face or 37-degree JIC. The second laminate includes 37-degree JIC and O-ring face fittings, both in straight, swivel, and 90-degree options. The third laminate includes various straight connections, including both crimp ends and field attachable ends, recognizing again the difference between the crimp flats that are visible on the field attachable terminal end types. If we look at a section, for example, this one here being an O-ring boss male terminal end type, if we measure the threads, we can identify perhaps a 3/4-16. This would be identified based on measurements of the fitting end, as well as the information available within the thread identification kit. Next, we would identify the hose size based on information available in the lay line or the part number of the terminal end. From this information, we can determine from the chart a C dimension, or an amount to be removed from the overall assembly length. We would repeat this same process for the opposite side of the hose assembly based upon the different terminal ends of the completed assembly. The final step would be to add the two together to determine a total amount to be subtracted from the overall assembly length. As a reminder, field attachable fittings, as shown on the top, are identifiable by the visible wrench flats. This is compared to the crimp style terminal ends, which are identifiable by the flats and the ridges that are formed during the crimping process. Another tip is related to O-ring face seal fittings. Keep in mind that an O-ring face seal assembly hose is measured from sealing surface to sealing surface, So in this case, it may require the swivel end to be slid back to measure from the actual sealing surface, as shown on the left, and not measured from the overall total assembly length, as shown on the right, as is done with other style of terminal end types. Another tip is related to the information on the lay line and the natural curvature of the hose. As the study manual outlines, terminal ends are to be placed in line with the natural curvature of the hose to prevent twisting. As is shown in the example of the hose, the visual natural curvature exists. So in this case, if we consider the hose as an assembly, remember that as you're taking measurements, to measure parallel to the hose and not measure between the 2 points. If we measure where it's not parallel, you'll get an inaccurate reading. So ensure that as you're taking measurements, you actually straighten the hose out, unlike what is shown in the natural curvature, to get an accurate reading. Another tip would be to review how to properly measure the crimp diameter of a hose. Remembering that step 1 is to measure the diameter in the middle of the crimped portion of the hose end. Second, place the caliper in the position to allow a measurement across the pressed flat portion of the crimp. 3, measure halfway between the ridges, and when using the dial caliper, be sure that the caliper fingers or jaws do not touch the ridges. Use the reference chart dimensions available from your fitting and hose manufacturer to then compare the measurement to ensure that you're between the minimum and maximum crimp diameter of the final hose assembly. And lastly, check your crimp machine periodically for ovality and taper to ensure that it is working correctly and providing an even crimp around the diameter of the hose. Another tip would be to double check the offset angle when using the far reference point. Remember that using a far reference point starts at the far point or the 6 o'clock position and then measures clockwise in rotation from that reference point. This would place 0 to 90 degrees in the lower left-hand quadrant, 90 to 180 degrees in the upper left-hand quadrant, 180 to 270 degrees in the upper right quadrant, and finally 270 degrees to 360 degrees in the lower right-hand quadrant. These all can be measured with the protractor or the angle gauge that is included as one of the tools within this station. I hope you've enjoyed this Station 3 overview video. Feel free to email us or visit our website if you have any further questions. Good luck with your preparation.